For this project, I'm using Arches 140-pound cold press paper, and I've blocked off a 5x7 rectangle with washi tape. The paint colors that I'm using for this are the blue and the sienna color from the Decadent Pies palette from Prima Watercolor. But any type of phthalo blue or sienna color that you have in your palette will work perfectly fine for this project. I begin this project with my 1-inch flat brush. I start by getting it wet in my water container with just plain water. I'm going to lay a wash from the horizon line all the way up to the top of the page. If you're worried about getting a straight line, just pencil in, use a ruler, and create a horizon line for yourself. Mine is about halfway up the page. You can see here that I really take my time getting the paper nice and wet. I don't have any puddles, but the whole thing is consistent and wet. I take my time because I'm letting that water sink into the fibers of the paper so that when I apply my paint, it will be at a perfect consistency and really accept the paint well. Now I'm ready to add my first color, which is the sienna color. I get the paint wet and I put it out on my palette, running my brush through it to make sure that I have a nice consistent flow on my brush. Remember that the color will dry slightly lighter, so if you put it down at first and it seems a little garish, don't worry about it because as you can see here, I keep running my brush back and forth through the color and then I'll wipe it onto my paper towel. So I'm taking a little bit of the paint out and it's going to dry lighter. Now I'm ready to do the same process with the blue. With this one, I'll start at the top and meet the sienna in the middle. I'll lay down that first line of blue and then keep going back and forth and slightly overlapping as I go down. So I'm losing paint color each time I go back and forth. So when I meet that middle section where the sienna is, I'll have less blue on my paintbrush. These two colors together actually make kind of a grayish green color, so you don't want them to meet too much, but they definitely should connect in your horizon. A big thing to remember when you're painting washes like this is to get in and get out. So take your time when you're wetting the paper, but when you're actually adding the paint, you want to really use long and fluid strokes, not short and tiny brush strokes. And you definitely don't want to fiddle too much. It will turn your fluid sky into a very cloud-filled sky really quickly. Once you're finished painting your sky, you take a wadded up paper towel and you just start to blot out a basic tree shape. So smaller at the top, and then as you go down, you'll get wider and wider. It can help in the middle part of the tree. If you take a little water and just add it to where you've blotted, and then use your paper towel again to blot that excess water out. It's also a good idea to take your paper towel and wipe off any wetness that you see on your washi tape, because sometimes that water or paint can leach back into your paper and create blooms. Now we're going to create the tree line in the background at the base of the horizon. I'm taking some phthalo blue and adding it right into the sienna to get a mixture of a grayish green color. As you can see on my palette, one side of this puddle here will have a little more blue and the bottom side will have a little more of the sienna. So I've got kind of a gradient happening on my palette there. So it goes from kind of a dark grayish green down to a more sienna gray color. My background has had a little time to dry, so it's still wet, but it's not really wet like when I started in the beginning. So it should be at a perfect place to accept some more paint and create a faded, blotted look of those distant trees. You can see here that I'm using a smaller brush. This is like maybe a 2, it's a round. And the reason I drop down to such a small brush is because I don't want to have too much water and paint in the brush fibers. So it really allows a lot more control over the amount of paint that bursts into that background, because I don't want these trees to be too big. Remember to not overwork this process. Simply let that paint blossom and flow into that background, and don't spend a lot of time on detail. Remember, these are way far out in the distance and they're not the star of the show. Simply add the paint, let it blossom, and then let it go. Now I'm ready to start painting in the foreground. To do this, I've gone back to my 1-inch brush and I'm just using a pale wash of the blue. I start at the bottom of that tree line and I'm just kind of laying in diagonal strokes. It gives the painting the feeling of the sunlight coming through. So the sun would be over on the left-hand side, and it's creating all these shadows and effects in the snow. Remember to leave a space for your tree, which drops down lower than that horizon line. So when you're painting in those diagonal strokes, you want to make sure that you leave some space for your tree. I rinse the blue off of my brush and then go right into the sienna. I add just a little sienna right on top of some of those lower blue strokes, and it makes it look like there's a little bit of earth coming through the snow. I then go back to my small number 2 round and I just add a few little grasses coming through the snow. To do this, you simply grab some sienna, start at the base, and just kind of flick your brush up very lightly. At this point, you can also check on your background if you need to add more color or a little darkening, but just remember not to overwork it. At this point, we need to dry the entire background so that we can paint the star of the show, which is the snowy tree. If you're impatient like me, you can use a hairdryer. We'll start painting the tree by painting the snow first. To do this, I'm using a number 4 round and I'm just using a very light wash of the blue. The most difficult part of this process is to remember to leave white, like the sun is shining on that snow. It's very easy to cover the whole tree in blue, but you want to make sure that you have places of white. It'll really make it glow when you're finished. Once you're finished with your blue, then you can start really making it look like a snow-filled tree by adding in some little touches of the evergreen showing through the snow. I've added the phthalo blue to the sienna to make kind of a greenish evergreen color. I start at the top with the top of the tree, and then I just start adding in needles that look like they're underneath those heavy boughs of snow. In some areas, the blue that you added before is still going to be a little wet, and that's okay. It's actually kind of a cool effect when this dark green hits that wet blue, and they kind of mix and mingle together. Just keep working from the top to the bottom of the tree, and remember not to overwork it. You can always come back and add more touches, but it's really difficult to try to take something away. So start light and try not to overwork it. To really anchor that tree into this scene, I'm grabbing my 1-inch brush again, going right back into my blue, and I'm adding a little deeper shadow on the right side. Like we said, the sunlight is coming from the left-hand side, so I'm just kind of following that diagonal that I have already put in place in this scene, and just adding a little touch of shadow at the bottom. And at this point, we get to call this painting done. Sit back and admire your work, and don't forget the most satisfying part is to take off your tape. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I really love painting this little scene. I enjoy it so much, in fact, that I painted it 3 times. So I want to remind you that you may not get it right the first time, and that's okay. I had to paint it 3 times to get it right for this video. So just enjoy the process and enjoy painting. Each time you try it, you'll learn something new. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, and thank you for watching.